Hi, this is just a quick video recap of what we did in class today for those who had to miss because you're in the COVID protocol. We started James Joyce's collection of short stories, Dubliners. It's probably backwards on your video camera there, but I've got a different version than you, different copy, but same texts. We began with the reading for today, which is The Sisters. So the first thing I did with the class is I had a quick write on the sisters. I asked students to identify how the narrator changes, or if the narrator changes. You can look in Module 1 and do the quick write on your own. The next thing that we did is I talked a little bit about sort of common themes in James Joyce's writing, some of the things that you can start looking for as you go through the sisters and then the subsequent readings. I'm going to have to look down here and put my glasses on because I took a picture of the whiteboard where I listed everything. I talked a little bit about how Joyce came out of Dublin, Ireland at an interesting time. He was born just about a decade after the Great Potato Famine that had left so many of the Irish destitute and really angry at the English. The English had ruled Ireland ever since Queen Elizabeth and her father Henry VIII way back in the 16th century, and they sort of ran it like their personal icebox. They'd use rich Englishmen would come over and they'd take over the great farms. They'd produce cattle and sheep and then send the meat over to England. So in the 1870s and 1880s, Ireland had what was known as the Great Potato Blight. They didn't keep the meat for themselves because it went to England. And their main crop, the potatoes, got a disease that caused them to just die on the vine before they were born. On a vine, is that right? To die in the soil. And so there was a great deal of hunger, a lot of poverty, and Ireland saw a lot of its fortunes go downhill from there. So when Joyce was born, it was into an Ireland that was full of beautiful buildings that had gone downhill because of the lack of money, because of the poverty. So in his collection of short stories, you see a lot of sort of hidden digs at England. You see them encoded in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's as simple as color. Green representing Ireland, brown representing England. Other times it's like in The Sisters, the street that they mention is Great Britain Street. So there's this sort of sense that England is controlling Ireland. And, in the next, or in the 100 years after Joyce's birth, would break out into the Troubles, into a number of riots, into revolution, and eventually self-rule for Ireland. So look for that. There's a lot of death in the stories. Our very first one, The Sisters, begins with the death of a priest. So, that's part and parcel of the stories. Talked about the Catholic Church as a negative force in Ireland. Joyce was raised a strict Catholic, but he rejected it as soon as he became a young adult and blamed the church for a lot of the problems that existed in Ireland at that time. Early in his youth, there had been a politician, Parnell, who almost got self-rule for Ireland, but then he was caught having an affair with a married woman. And the priests and the church basically sort of drummed him out of politics. And so there was a large population that was angry at the church for that. He writes a lot about family as being a constraint on people, and people being in a state of paralysis, unable to move forward, whether it's because of religion, because of poverty, because of alcoholism, which runs through many of these stories. Or because family prevents people from being their true selves. Over and over again, you see that paralysis being developed in the various short stories. What else do I have here? Poverty, youth, and naiveness. All these things also do run throughout the story. We went from there to discussing the Sisters itself. We talked about just what a unique story it was, the way that the narrator, this young boy, is never given a name. It's first person, so we see it through his point of view, but at key times we don't know whether we trust him or not, and he's too naive, too young to really be able to say everything that he wants to say. But he gives us enough details that we're left wondering what exactly his relationship with Father Flynn had been. The objective source, semi-objective source that we get in the book itself is the family friend, Old Cotter, who the boy sees as being an old fool. Cotter says, I wouldn't let my son hang around this priest. He didn't think it was good for him. Thought it was weird. But then he never tells us exactly why. We never get the details. And that's a typically Joyce thing. He plays around with perspective and point of view and has somebody tell a story, but then at the very last minute back off. So we're left wondering what exactly the mystery is. Joyce's short stories tended to build towards an epiphany, named after the religious idea of sudden insight. And yet so often, right when you get to the epiphany, it's not clear, it's murky. In this case, we're not sure if the epiphany is in the boy who starts questioning his relationship to Father Flynn after the priest dies, or if the epiphany really came from Father Flynn himself. The mysterious moment at the heart of the story is when Father Flynn is doing one of the most sacred rites in the church. He's doing the Eucharist, having the wine and the crackers representing the blood of Christ and the flesh of Christ, and he drops the chalice, this holy thing that's supposed to have the blood of Christ in it, and he just disappears. Everybody goes to look for him, and they finally find him in the church laughing hysterically, and they think that's when his mind is sort of gone. But part of the thing that I argued for in class today was, here's a person who's devoted his life to this belief that transubstantiation exists, that the Eucharist is an important ritual that must be taken to provide pure faith, and yet when he drops this very sacred object, nothing happens to him. There's no repercussion. So maybe Father Flynn is having this moment of doubt after that, and his laughter represents an understanding, an epiphany that his life has in some ways been wasted. And that's not my point of view. I think that's more James Joyce's. As I said, he left the Catholic Church. He was an apostate and was really more of an agnostic for the rest of his life after that, although his outlook was always shaped by the early education that he got from the Jesuits. The other thing I talked about and I asked was, why the book was called The Sisters, when clearly the focus is either on Father Flynn or on his relationship with the narrator or directly on the narrator. And, I pose that as a question, fully saying I don't know. I've never quite been able to puzzle that out in my own mind. It's an interesting story. As I said, it has so many of the things that we'll see in other stories, priests, dead priests. You wouldn't believe there are several dead priests in the collection of short stories. Questions about faith, all these things like that. And then also the oddness of family relationships. The boy, the narrator in this story, doesn't live with his mother and his father. He seems to live with his aunt. And that's something that we see time and time again in these stories. And I don't know if it's because after the Great Potato Famine, so many people had left England and families were broken up. If it was because of the pervasive alcoholism in the culture, if something else had gone on. But time and time again, you see either missing family members or strained family members and relations. So that was the gist. That was the main thing that we did today. I had them then get in small groups and talk about what they saw in the story. And it was just sort of an ongoing discussion back and forth. More than anything, just an introduction to Joyce. The last 25 minutes or so of the class, I asked everybody to take one last look at the rough draft of the short story we've been working on for a couple weeks and work on that and then share it with other people and try to get feedback from fellow students. See if they could suggest any ways they could make the story more interesting, add additional characters. Talked about like the sisters, the way that there's shared perspective, both from the narrator, old Cotter, and then the aunt there, as well as sort of the flashbacks to what happened with Father Flynn. So there are multiple moments of conflict that keep the story moving along. And I suggested, do the same thing in your own story if you can. So anyway, that's just a very quick wrap up. We don't have class on Monday because it's Labor Day. So I'll be back Wednesday with another recap for those who missed the class. Keep going to the Canvas website. Pay attention to what the reading schedule is. You have to read every story in Dubliners, not just the ones that we discuss. So, go through it pretty methodically. Keep notes when you take your module quiz at the end of Module 1. There will be things on there from stories we don't discuss in class. So you got to read everything, and you got to read it pretty closely. I hope you have a good weekend. I hope that everybody is remaining safe and healthy. If anything's going on, please email me and let me know, and I'll see you next week.